My name is Matt Hamilton. I am the director for our solutions development team. We have a team of 13 architects across AWS and Azure, and we build automated deployments of solutions that you can use in your Azure and Amazon Web Services environments. Today, we're going to talk about a very specific solution that we call SMB Fraud Defense, and what that solution means, some of the attack threats that we see, and why the solution is relevant for what's happening in the world today. So we've had this solution in market since June of 2022. We originally built this because of a large number of crypto mining attacks that we were seeing in customer environments. So I'm going to talk a bit about those cases and what's happening. I'll talk about what Microsoft has done to address that. We'll also explain why you shouldn't be so scared of that, but there are steps that you need to take to make sure that you're protecting yourselves and your environments. So we've had a pretty bad year of crypto mining attacks, and it's not specific to Microsoft. When you look at a crypto mining attack, what typically used to happen is an attacker would somehow compromise a machine, a single machine, right? So your laptop, a single server, or a single environment, and the damage was usually limited to what could be done with that machine. What they figured out in the last couple of years is that going after a cloud account is a much more profitable attack target. So instead of getting a single server, with 16 gig of RAM to mine cryptocurrency and a standard build, I can go after an Azure, a GCP, or an AWS account, which gives me an unlimited line of credit to actually start mining cryptocurrencies. It's not the most effective way to mine cryptocurrency, but when you're not paying the bill and you don't have to pay for anything and you get all of the financial benefits, it's very effective. So one of the things we've seen is that it's primarily happening to customers with poor password hygiene, no MFA on their accounts, no audits, no logging, no alerts, and no budget. And unfortunately, what we've seen in the Microsoft space is that represents about 60% of the customer base. So it's not a small one-off problem. And part of that has to do with the partner channel model and how partners monitor their customers' security. A lot of customers will go in and turn off security defaults and some of the controls, and that turns off MFA for everyone in the environment. So we have a couple reports here. The first one I want to show is our Google Threat Horizons report. So this is from November 2021, and Google publishes these on a quarterly basis and talks about what their most upcoming threats are, causes for breaches, concerning trends and things that are happening. And since November 21, they've openly communicated that 86% of breaches in their customers' environments are specifically for the purpose of conducting crypto mining. That is staggering because the next closest is 10% for port scanning. So trying to find open endpoints out on the internet, primarily to steal data or conduct crypto mining exercises. One of the other big problems is phishing. So we're not talking about robust, extreme types of breaking into these accounts. A lot of time it's phishing, and a couple of other, silly controls that would be stopped by MFA, would be stopped by password lists, number matching, or any number of authentication options that you can give your end user. Sometimes they can get in through cloud malware where they can infect a server, and then, if an admin's using that server, they can do a keystroke logger. That is a form we've seen. Phishing is the most common, right? They send you a malicious email, you click it, it looks like an Azure portal or an admin login, and they grab your password and username. One of the worst, though, is for brute force and password sprays, because Microsoft, by default, when you're using security defaults, protect against these things. What we do see, though, is that when customers go in and turn off all those controls, that leaves you susceptible to brute force and password spray attacks. And the one we don't talk about as much, but it is common, is being able to buy credentials on dark web. So when I password spray, I can go online and buy a big list of passwords and usernames and try those against Microsoft domains. And if they happen to be an admin because they use their work password for signing up for, Experian, or signing up for a credit reporting agency, signing up for any kind of third-party websites, mailers, promos, right? That is a thing that happens today. And so what can happen when you have those instances or attacks, it can result in cryptojacking. It also can result in data theft. It can result in them using your environments for performing malicious activities, such as denial of service attacks. But the net is all of these things consume cloud spend. The worst case we've seen is about 1.4 million. We consistently see them in the $600,000 to $700,000 range. And so we've been working with Microsoft for a few months now to make changes to the Azure platform and defaults. One of the things that they've done to address this is they're changing the core and quota limits, which is a good step in the right direction. However, when we consider the size and scope of a lot of these businesses, we're mostly talking SMB customers. So the default quota was 500 cores per region, which if you run it all day, every day for 2 weeks amounts to about $1.4 million. They've reduced that quota down to 125 cores per region. It's a step in the right direction, but you still have 60 Azure regions where they can deploy virtual machines and still rack up about $48,000 a day in consumption. So it's still a significant threat. And so what we've been talking to partners a lot lately is, looking at your business model. If I have 30 end customers and 1 or 2 of them ends up getting breached in the next year, can I cover that? Can I cover that consumption? And how do I monitor and maintain that risk and keep visibility to it? So some of the good news, big pushbacks that we often get are, an old way of thinking about MFA. A lot of people seem to still think this is MFA from the early 2000s, where I have to set up and enroll all these devices and configure all these crazy things. It's not anymore. With Microsoft Authenticator and Azure Active Directory Premium P1 and P2 licensing for Azure AD, it's actually very simple. You can enforce MFA across your customer base, configure if they use applications. You can allow them to bring their own device. It's no more difficult than setting up MFA on your bank account or any number of services. For example, I live here in Spain. I have to use MFA for my government healthcare, for the bank, for any kind of tools I'm using to identify myself. Even for just like basic payment systems and even buying things like at the store, if it's over 50 euros, I have to use an app to authenticate or take an SMS. So in today's age, it's everywhere. Everyone is familiar with MFA. So it's no longer as much of a problem as it used to be. And so one of the things Microsoft's doing to force this is they've deactivated legacy authentication. And this was the biggest pushback, was that they couldn't use the old scripts and legacy auth and the old printers and servers, that used a user impersonation. So as of January, they've actually disabled all of the old basic authentication protocols. And so now there's no longer a technical reason why people need to use legacy authentication, because you can't use it with the platform anymore. So this is a really big help in moving people towards a secure auth framework, especially with third-party software, because flat out their software will not work if they're using these old principles. So one of the analogies we like to use, right, is if you have a cloud account and you don't have MFA, budgets, alerts, and settings that log your access, right, you basically have a house with no locks on the doors, no window, no dog, no security camera, and a large amount of valuables inside. These are kind of the basic standards that need to be done to secure any cloud account that you have. There's obviously a lot more that you can do, but we're very aware that, in the SMB space and in some of the smaller companies that, as end users, they may not have the budget, the appetite, or the controls for doing this stuff. The good news is with the Microsoft Azure platform and Microsoft 365, you are able to take and do all of these controls at a low cost. It's very low barrier to entry, and then it's also very easy implementation. So we're going to start to talk about some of these features we've implemented for this solution in order for you to be able to go in and use those features. Adrian's going to do a live demo in a second, so I'll skip through the demo videos that we have. But we focus on a couple of areas. So the first thing is we're going to show you an analysis of your tenant. So we'll talk about your core security features and your prerequisites in order to set this up. So there's some cost features, there's budgeting, and then there's also some controls around your security defaults. We're going to cover those authentication options in more detail during Adrian's demo. We'll allow you to set up and configure that budget. And then we're going to do 2 types of policies. Number 1 being Azure policies. This is going to restrict the different regions where somebody can deploy virtual machines and resources in your customer's environment, right? So I'm taking my threat footprint. By default, I've got 60 regions, 125 cores, every VM type, right? That's a lot of money. And what we want you to do is reduce that down. So if I'm only operating in the Northern European data center, let's restrict all other data centers and all other VM types so that if there is a breach or if there is a problem, the only place that things are going to get spun up are going to be in the North Europe data center and significantly reduced any costs that I may incur. The other piece that we strongly recommend is conditional access policies. We'll talk, Adrian, you'll talk about the difference between security defaults and conditional access, but conditional access is going to give me really granular and specific control over where people can log in, over where admins can log in, what admins can do, what type of device the admin has to be on. You can get extreme and restrict down admin login to your corporate virtual network or a VPN to on-site. So there's a ton of configurability in those. And so we really like conditional access policies. And then the last piece is your alerts. So we always want you to set alerts. You should know what a standard budget is. If your customer is normally spending $2,000 a month, or 2,000 euros a month, or kroner a month, or crowns, you want to have alerts for those consumption levels, and you want to be notified about midpoint in the month. That way, if you get an alert at the beginning of the billing period in the first week, because it didn't trip any other alarms, you're going to have that last mile alarm to let you know that there's something wrong with the consumption and flag you to go take a look at that. So that's kind of our features list. We'll talk about MFA for a second because that's a common question that comes up. There's really three ways to do MFA using Microsoft's tools. There is per user MFA, there is security defaults, and then there is conditional access. We do not recommend per user MFA for a number of reasons. And don't think about it at the end customer level, think about it at a partner level, right? So if I'm a partner and I am managing 30 end customers, cloud accounts, and environments, it's not that scalable for me to have to go manually maintain a list of all admins in the account, manually configure their MFA status, and then make sure that every time I go through like a customer onboarding or a change, I'm having to now go in, log into that customer environment, add them to a management group, and then make sure that I'm inputting MFA on that specific user. It gets out of scale really quick. So when you start to talk about managing companies with 50 or 60 end users, some people in IT, some people in finance may need to have different permissions. This is unscalable very quickly. A large number of the accounts that we have seen breached have been using per user MFA, and there's just a couple of admins that don't have MFA turned on for whatever reason. They forgot to go back in and turn it on after a temporary shutoff. There's a number of reasons, but we don't recommend this method. Security defaults is a blanket MFA for all users in the environment. This is the free one that comes from Microsoft. So every user will get an MFA prompt in this situation. There's no granularity. I can't configure which groups. I can't configure where they log in from. There's no configurations in it, but every user will be prompted to authenticate with either text message or the Authenticator app, which is good. So this is the absolute bare minimum that we hope that you use in these environments. The last policies you can use are called conditional access, and these are those really granular ones that we talked about. For us, this is the highest level of control because you can not only restrict that the user needs to MFA, you can restrict the location they're logging in for, and then what we like as well is MFA for admin actions. So if I want to go if I log in as an admin, if I go to create a virtual machine or throw a script in there to spin up a bunch of servers, I'm going to have to do an additional authentication to get through there. So this is one that helps catch any kind of problems that get through. This will also control the geographies, the IP addresses, the machine types. So we consider that the highest level of security that you can put on the account from an identity standpoint. And then, of course, there are third-party options. There's Cisco, Duo, Okta, Ping, ID. There's a ton of different options out there that are all very good solutions as well. But if you're looking to go full Microsoft stack, in a lot of cases, customers that have been breached already have all the licenses to use conditional access, and they just haven't configured it, which is a real shame. So if you're buying E3, E5, Business Premium, you already have Azure AD P1 and P2, you are already paying for the advanced security features in your Azure environment, and we highly recommend that you take advantage of those before something happens. And then we'll share this out post-call. This is just a much more in-detailed list of all the features of the solution and showing you kind of what the solution can do for you versus what Microsoft does by default. I'm not going to go through this in deep detail, but we'll have Alex and the team share this out afterwards. And so, Adrian, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you for a demo of the deployment.